Back in the 1960s, songwriters had a gift for saying one thing and meaning another. Whether it was to dodge censors, make a political point, or simply let listeners find their own truth in the words, some of the most beloved songs of that decade were carrying a second story underneath the one you thought you knew. Here are 15 songs from the 1960s with hidden meanings you didn't know. Number 15. Puff, the Magic Dragon by Peter, Paul, and Mary. Released in January 1963, this song charmed its way to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the defining folk recordings of the decade. It tells the story of a boy named Jackie Paper and his dragon companion, Puff, who adventure together until the boy grows up and moves on.
And frolicked in the autumn mist in a land.
The hidden meaning most people assumed was drugs. A 1964 Newsweek article kicked off the rumor by cataloging supposed marijuana references tucked into the lyrics. Puff as a reference to smoking, Jackie Paper as rolling papers, Hanalei as a nod to Hanalei in Hawaii, known for cannabis. The theories spread fast and stuck hard. The actual origin is considerably more innocent. The lyrics were based on a poem written in 1959 by Leonard Lipton, a 19-year-old physics student at Cornell University. Peter Yarrow set it to music and gave Lipton co-writing credit. Both men spent decades firmly denying the drug interpretation. Yarrow described it plainly as a song about innocence lost, about the moment childhood slips away and imagination gives way to adult life. Puff waiting alone in his cave is the image of every childhood fantasy we eventually outgrow. The drug theory never went away, but neither did the song. Number 14. The Times They Are A-Changin' by Bob Dylan.
The times they are a-changin'.
Bob Dylan released this as the title track of his third album in January 1964. On the surface, it sounds like a broad anthem of generational change. But Dylan was precise about who he was talking to. Each verse addresses a different group: journalists, politicians, parents, and their children. He was writing directly at the political establishment and demanding it step aside.
For the times they are a-changin'.
Dylan recorded the song in October of 1963. Less than a month later, President Kennedy was assassinated. When Dylan opened a concert the following night with it, he later told his biographer, Anthony Scaduto, that he couldn't understand why the audience was applauding. The world had just been shattered, and the song was suddenly carrying more than he had written into it.
Our mothers and fathers throughout the land.
In the liner notes to his 1985 box set, Biograph, Dylan described it as deliberate and purposeful, shaped in part by how closely the folk music movement and the civil rights movement were running together at the time. The verse aimed at mothers and fathers was less about warmth than a specific rebuke. The old world was fading, and Dylan was telling the people who built it to either lend a hand or get out of the way.
For the times they are a-changin'.
It never charted as a single in the United States. In Britain, it reached number 9. Its cultural reach either way went far beyond any chart position.
The order is rapidly fading, and the first one.
Number 13. Eve of Destruction by Barry McGuire.
Tell me over and over and over.
This song hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in September 1965, one of the most extraordinary chart events of the decade. A raw, openly pessimistic protest song reaching the top of the mainstream pop charts was not supposed to happen, and the establishment reacted furiously. P.F. Sloan wrote it in mid-1965 and later described it as a prayer, a desperate accounting of everything wrong with the world addressed to God. Barry McGuire recorded his vocal as a rough guide take in a single late-night session, his voice raspy and exhausted. The producer used that take. Neither man expected what followed.
I don't believe we're on the eve of.
Several American radio stations banned the song outright, calling it an aid to the enemy in Vietnam. A BC radio blocked it network-wide. The BBC placed it on a restricted list, barring it from general entertainment programs.
There'll be no one to save. We'll
What the lyrics were actually doing was threading multiple crises together. The Vietnam draft, racial violence, nuclear anxiety, and the specific absurdity of sending men to die who weren't old enough to vote for the government sending them. Sloan always maintained it was not a protest song in any conventional sense. He called it a love song to humanity. The world, as it turned out, wasn't ready to receive it that way.
You don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
Number 12, For What It's Worth, by Buffalo Springfield.
Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going.
This is one of the most widely misidentified songs in rock history. Released in December 1966, and peaking at number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the spring of 1967, it was almost immediately adopted as the anthem of the Vietnam anti-war movement and held that association for decades. Stephen Stills wrote it about something else entirely.
Stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going.
In November 1966, Los Angeles County imposed a 10 p.m. curfew on the Sunset Strip and threatened to demolish Pandora's Box, a popular club on the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Crescent Heights. As many as 1,000 young people gathered to protest. The demonstrations turned into confrontations with police. Stills witnessed the events and wrote the song in roughly 15 minutes. The band recorded it on December 5th, 1966, just weeks after the riots. The title doesn't appear anywhere in the lyrics. According to one account, Stills prefaced it for a record executive with, "Let me play you a song for what it's worth." And the phrase stuck as the title.
Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Stills later acknowledged that Vietnam was on his mind at the same time, and that the song's ambiguity was part of its lasting power. But its specific origin was a curfew dispute on a stretch of Hollywood Boulevard. The anti-war movement borrowed it and never gave it back.
Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going.
Number 11, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles. The Beatles released this on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in May 1967. Within days, listeners noticed that the first letters of the title spelled LSD. The theory spread immediately and never fully disappeared. John Lennon maintained until his death that the song came from a drawing his son Julian brought home from school. Julian, then 4 years old, had painted his schoolmate Lucy O'Donnell surrounded by stars and told his father it was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Lennon took that image and built the song's surreal, dreamlike world around it. Julian Lennon confirmed the story in interviews decades later. Lucy O'Donnell, who grew up to become Lucy Vauden, was aware of the song's origin throughout her life. She died in 2009. Paul McCartney later acknowledged that the imagery aligned with psychedelic experience and that the band was not naive about how listeners would receive it. But the initials, by every account from those involved in making the song, were a coincidence. What the song was actually doing beneath the surface was creating a space entirely disconnected from ordinary life, using the language of childhood imagination to express a kind of escape from everything the Beatles had become by 1967. Number 10, A Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum. Released in May 1967, this song spent 6 weeks at number 1 in the United Kingdom and became one of the most played recordings of the decade. Its organ melody was adapted from a Bach suite, and its lyrics were unlike anything else on the radio. Keith Reid wrote the words. He has spoken over the years about the song being rooted in a party he attended. A phrase he overheard between a man and a woman became the song's emotional anchor. The imagery throughout, the Vestal Virgins, the Miller, the couple adrift in the night, was deliberately impressionistic. Reid was influenced by the Beat Poets and wanted a lyric that felt like a half-remembered dream rather than a clear narrative. The most common interpretation? That the song describes a couple coming apart under the weight of something unspoken, perhaps grief, perhaps betrayal, Perhaps simply the passage of time is supported by the tone throughout, though Reed never confirmed a single fixed meaning. That openness was intentional. He wanted the song to function the way a dream does, vivid in the moment, impossible to fully pin down once it ends. Gary Brooker's organ melody, borrowed and reworked from a Bach suite, gave the words a gravity they might not otherwise have carried. It was one of the first pop songs to use a classical structure so directly and deliberately, and it told the listener immediately that something serious was being communicated, even if exactly what was being communicated remained gloriously unclear. People hear different things in it depending on where they are in their own lives, and that has remained true for over 50 years. Number 9. Paint It Black by the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones released this in May 1966, and it reached number 1 in both the United States and the United Kingdom. The surface reading is fairly clear: grief, loss, the desire to drain all color from the world. The deeper layer is in how precisely that grief operates. The narrator isn't expressing vague sadness. He is cataloging everything visible around him and insisting on transforming each image into darkness. The song was credited to Brian Jones, Mick Jagger, and Keith Richards, and many listeners in 1966 tied its imagery to Vietnam, specifically to the news footage and photographs of flag-draped coffins that had begun appearing on television sets across America. Neither Jagger nor Richards confirmed a specific inspiration, but the connection to mid-1960s grief was widely noted at the time. The sitar, played by Brian Jones, gave the track a mournful Eastern texture that was heard as its own kind of statement. It sounded ancient and contemporary at once, exotic and funereal together, which carried something the lyric alone couldn't quite reach.
I see a red door and I want it painted black.
The use of the sitar was also new enough in 1966 that it unsettled listeners in a way a guitar wouldn't have. It made the darkness feel foreign and inescapable at the same time, as if the grief the song was describing had no cultural address, no particular country, no single flag it belonged to. In the context of a war that Americans were watching on their television sets every evening, that feeling of darkness without borders had a weight that was hard to shake. Number 8. Blowin' in the Wind by Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan first performed this in April 1962, and it appeared on his second album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, in May 1963. It is a series of questions about peace, freedom, and human dignity, and what gave it its hidden force was what Dylan chose not to do with those questions. He didn't answer them. The refrain, "The answer is blowin' in the wind," has been pulled in almost every direction. Some heard it as hopeful. The answer exists if only people would open their eyes. Others heard it as bleak. The answer has been scattered by forces too large to confront.
Answer, my friend, is a blowing in the wind.
Peter, Paul, and Mary released their cover in June 1963, and it reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, bringing Dylan's writing to an enormous mainstream audience. Dylan's own recording was never released as a single in America.
Yes, and how many days will it take?
He was 21 when he wrote it, and later distanced himself from the protest song label it earned him. He described writing it quickly and being surprised by the weight people placed on it. But the questions it was asking, about civil rights, about war, about when people would be allowed to live with basic dignity, were exactly the questions America was refusing to answer in 1963.
It's a blowing in the wind. The end.
Number 7. The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Paul Simon wrote this in 1963. It was first released in October of 1964 on the duo's debut album and went largely unnoticed. Then, in 1965, without Simon or Garfunkel's knowledge, their producer Tom Wilson overdubbed it with electric guitar and drums and re-released it. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in January 1966. The song describes a dream, walking through darkness, finding a crowd of people talking without speaking, hearing without listening. It is addressed directly to darkness itself. Simon wrote it in the bathroom of his parents' home with the lights off, a detail he mentioned in later interviews. The widely accepted reading is that it was a response to President Kennedy's assassination in November 1963, written in the weeks immediately after. Simon was 21. The image of modern people kneeling before the neon god they made was a specific critique of television culture, the way mass media had begun to replace genuine human connection with noise. Simon later confirmed that the song was about that disconnection, the particular silence between people who are in constant contact but not actually reaching each other.
That voices never share.
Number 6. The House of the Rising Sun by The Animals. The Animals released this in June 1964, and it went to number 1 in both the United Kingdom and the United States. Eric Burdon's vocal gave the track an unhurried weight that transformed an old folk tune into something entirely present. The song's roots run deep through American folk tradition. Alan Lomax had recorded a version of it in the 1930s, and Woody Guthrie recorded one in 1941. Various forms had circulated for decades, but the Animals' recording fixed it in the cultural memory. Earlier versions had been sung from a woman's perspective. The Animals transposed it to a male voice without changing most of the original words, leaving the story's specific tragedy more open and universally applicable.
In the house of the rising sun.
What most listeners absorbed in 1964 was a narrative of ruin, someone looking back on a wasted life, warning others away from the same path. The House of the Rising Sun is understood to be a brothel or gambling house in New Orleans, a place where lives were quietly consumed. The narrator has watched his father destroyed by the same place that destroyed him. He cannot get out. For a generation hearing it in the early years of the counterculture, that feeling of being trapped inside a system you never chose was not a metaphor. It was recognition. The Animals delivered it with no irony and no distance. Just a voice and a progression that sounded like it had been worn smooth by the same story being told over and over again, for longer than anyone could remember. Number 5. People Are Strange by The Doors.
When you're strange, when you're strange, when you're...
The Doors released this on their second album, Strange Days, in September 1967. It is just under 2.5 minutes long, and on first listen sounds like a playful observation about social alienation. Jim Morrison wrote it after a period of severe depression. Robbie Krieger later recalled that Morrison had climbed a hill near his home in Los Angeles during that period. He came back from that walk transformed and wrote the song shortly after, telling Krieger he had seen the moon and felt the darkness lift.
When you're strange, when you're strange.
The song's perspective? Faces look ugly when you're alone. Women seem wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are uneven when you're down. Is a precise description of how depression reshapes the world. Everything becomes hostile. Everything becomes strange because the lens has gone dark. Morrison never described it in clinical terms. He described it as an observation about isolation, that the world becomes a different place depending on where you are inside yourself. But the autobiographical detail sharpens it considerably. He wrote the song The Day the Darkness Lifted, which means it is a description of a condition he had just left.
You're strange. Faces come out of the...
Number 4. Abraham, Martin, and John by Dion.
You tell me where he's gone.
Dion DiMucci released this in August 1968, and it reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. It is quiet, restrained, and almost deliberately understated. And that understatement was the entire point. Dick Holler wrote it on the day Robert F. Kennedy was killed, June 6, 1968. Kennedy had just won the California Democratic presidential primary and been shot in the moments after his victory speech. The song was designed to hold 4 losses in a single breath. Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy each had been killed. Each had spoken directly about freedom and equality. Each had been taken before the possibilities he represented could be realized.
He freed a lot of people, but I've seen the good.
The lyric never mentions assassination, never uses the word violence, never names the specific failures behind each death. It simply asks where they have gone and notes that the good seem to die young. That refusal to state the obvious, because the obvious was too large to say plainly, was the song's most powerful quality. Haller had originally imagined the Kingston Trio or Peter, Paul, and Mary recording it. Dion was a recovering heroin addict newly signed to Lorry Records, and this was the first single they released on him. He recorded it in one take. Number 3, With a Little Help from My Friends by the Beatles. The Beatles released this as the second track on Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in May 1967, sung in character by Ringo Starr as the fictional Billy Shears. It sounds warm and simple. A song about getting by with the people around you. Lennon and McCartney wrote it specifically for Ringo to sing. But the lyrics carry a second layer that was clear to many listeners in 1967. The question about getting high, asked and answered within the song itself, was unmistakable to an audience already immersed in the counterculture imagery surrounding the album. The BBC banned the song when it was later released as a single in the early 1970s, citing the drug reference. Joe Cocker's powerful cover version in 1968 made the song's emotional register even more explicit, though his recording drew no such censorship at the time. But beneath the warmth of the surface and the chemical subtext, the song was doing something else. It gave Ringo Starr, the least celebrated Beatle, the one most often treated as a footnote, the album's most quietly disarming moment. Lennon and McCartney wrote him something that only he, with his particular voice and manner, could deliver. That placement on the record was not an accident. Number 2, Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds. The Byrds released this in October 1965, and it went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in December of that year. The melody was written by Pete Seeger, and the lyrics were drawn almost entirely from the Book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, the passage that begins, "To everything there is a season." What most listeners in 1965 heard was a peace anthem. The song was released at the height of the Vietnam War escalation, and its final line, "A time for peace, I swear it's not too late," was the only addition Seeger made to the ancient text. He had written the song in the late 1950s, and those words were entirely his own. To everything, turn, turn, turn. The hidden layer was in the source material itself. Ecclesiastes is not a hopeful book. It is one of the most candid and unsentimental texts in the entire biblical canon, an extended meditation on the fact that nothing lasts and nothing is truly new. Its argument that everything cycles includes a time for war, a time for hate, and a time for death every bit as much as their opposites. What Seeger and the Byrds did was take that ancient, clear-eyed text and wrap it in a folk rock arrangement that made it feel like optimism. The listeners singing along to it as a peace anthem were not wrong, but the original text from which it came was carrying no such reassurance. The song was drawing on something far older and more complicated than anyone lining up to hear it in 1965 knew. Pete Seeger had written the melody in the late 1950s while working as a folk musician, and he was well aware of what Ecclesiastes was actually saying. His single edition, that line about peace, was a deliberate act of hope grafted onto a text that offered none. That gap between the source and the edition is where the song lives. It is an act of faith inserted into a document of futility. And whether that act of faith holds is a question the song leaves entirely open. Number 1, Mr. Tambourine Man by Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan wrote this in early 1964 and released it on Bringing It All Back Home in March 1965. The Byrds had already released their famous cover as a single in April 1965, and it went to number 1 on both sides of the Atlantic. The drug reading attached itself to the song almost immediately. The Tambourine Man as a dealer. The journey as a psychedelic trip. Dylan denied it. He described the song in interviews as being about the creative process, specifically about a musician he had encountered named Bruce Langhorne, who played a large Turkish tambourine at a recording session and whose image had stayed in Dylan's memory. In Dylan's own framing, the song describes the surrender to a creative force larger than yourself. The narrator is exhausted, emptied out, standing between waking and sleeping, asking to be taken somewhere beyond the ordinary. It is about the particular condition that makes art possible, the state of openness that comes only when you stop trying to control the outcome and simply follow wherever the music leads. Whether that state is reached through exhaustion, through prayer, or through something else entirely, Dylan left deliberately open. That ambiguity is the song's whole point, and it is why, more than 60 years after it was written, people are still debating what the Tambourine Man was actually offering. Every one of those songs sounded one way on the radio and carried something else entirely once you understood where it came from. That's what made the 1960s so different. The music wasn't decoration. It was doing something, carrying messages that couldn't always be said directly, wrapping them in melody until the world caught up. Some of those messages, it turns out, we're still working through today. If you enjoyed this list, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more than you might think. And subscribe if you want to keep exploring the history behind the songs you grew up with. There's always more to find.